Mac awoke to a sound like wet leaves rustling, a soft groan echoing in the stillness of his room. At first he thought it was just the wind, or perhaps the house settling in the night, but the noise was too close, too intimate, as if it came from within the very walls themselves. The darkness pressed in around him, thick and humid, and for a moment he wondered if he was still dreaming. He lay for a moment, disoriented, the scent of damp earth heavy in the air. Each breath felt thick, almost muddy, as if he were inhaling the forest floor after a rainstorm. The sheets clung to his skin, damp with sweat or perhaps something else, and the air was so saturated with moisture that droplets formed on the window pane, blurring the world outside into a smear of shadow and faint, distant light. His hand, reaching for the familiar cold stone of his bedroom wall, met something soft, yielding. He recoiled. The sensation was so alien, so wrong, that for a heartbeat he could not process what he was feeling. The wall, which should have been solid and reassuring, gave way beneath his touch, as if he had pressed his palm into the belly of some great beast. The surface was warm, almost feverish, and slick with a thin film of moisture that clung to his skin. Where stone should be, flesh pulsed. Veins, thick as his wrist, throbbed beneath a thin, translucent skin. The veins twisted and writhed, moving with a life of their own, casting strange shadows in the dim light. He could see the blood, if it was blood, pulsing through them, a dark, sluggish current that seemed to sync with the rhythm of his own racing heart. The wall was alive, impossibly alive, and it seemed to breathe with him, expanding and contracting in slow, deliberate waves. A low, rhythmic thump resonated from within, a heartbeat drumming beneath his fingertips. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of sleep. The sound was unmistakable, a living, beating heart buried deep within the walls of his own room. Each pulse sent a tremor through the floorboards, vibrating up through the mattress and into his bones. He tried to pull his hand away, but for a moment it felt as if the wall clung to him, unwilling to let him go. Max scrambled back, heart hammering against his ribs. His back hit the opposite wall, and a fresh wave of nausea washed over him. The room seemed to close in, the air growing thicker, more oppressive, as if the very atmosphere was conspiring to suffocate him. He gasped, desperate for clean air, but all he could taste was the metallic tang of blood and the sickly sweetness of decay. Panic clawed at his throat, and his vision swam with spots of black and red. This wall, too, was alive, warm and slick beneath his trembling fingers. No matter where he turned, the same yielding, pulsing flesh met his touch. It was as if the entire room had transformed into the inside of some monstrous creature, and he was trapped within its living body. The walls seemed to pulse in time with his own terror, the veins throbbing faster as his panic grew. He could feel the heat radiating from the surface, a feverish warmth that made his skin crawl. His bedroom, once a sanctuary of stone and aged wood, was now a cage of flesh and bone. The familiar lines of the furniture were warped and twisted, half swallowed by the living walls. Where there had once been shelves and windows, there were now ridges of bone and cartilage, arching overhead like the ribs of a great beast. The floor beneath him was soft and uneven, pulsing gently with every beat of the room's monstrous heart. Mac realized with a growing sense of horror that he was entombed within something alive, something that had claimed his sanctuary as its own. The room was no longer his. It was a living tomb, and he was its unwilling prisoner, trapped in the belly of a nightmare that had once been home. Panic tightened its grip. He had to get out. Max stumbled towards the bedroom door, the floorboards strangely springy beneath his feet. As he passed, he could have sworn he felt a faint tremor underfoot, saw a ripple of movement beneath the skin of the floor. He reached for the doorknob, his hand hovering over the cold metal. The whispers started then, soft at first, like the wind sighing through the eaves. But as he listened, they grew louder, morphing into guttural moans that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. Mac jerked his hand back as if burned. The whispers followed, swirling around him, taunting him with their unintelligible murmurs. He was trapped, entombed within a nightmare of living, breathing walls. He spent the next few days, or perhaps it was weeks. Time had lost all meaning, in a haze of terror and confusion. Every moment bled into the next, the boundaries between day and night dissolving in the oppressive gloom. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a constant gnawing anxiety that clung to him like a second skin. He wandered the corridors, unsure if he was awake or trapped in some feverish nightmare, his mind fraying at the edges with each passing hour. The house seemed to warp his sense of reality, distorting time and memory until he could no longer trust his own thoughts. Shadows stretched and twisted along the walls, whispering secrets he could almost understand, but never quite grasp. Hunger and thirst gnawed at him, but the fear was always stronger, always closer. The house was a living, breathing entity, its every creak and groan a testament to its macabre sentience. The floorboards moaned beneath his feet as if protesting his presence, while the walls seemed to shift and settle with a will of their own. Sometimes he would hear a low, guttural rumble deep within the structure, like the house was clearing its throat or muttering in its sleep. The windows, once portals to the outside world, now felt like unblinking eyes, watching his every move with cold indifference. Even the silence was alive, thick and suffocating, pressing in on him from all sides. The walls pulsed with a rhythmic life, the veins beneath the translucent skin throbbing like exposed arteries. At times he could swear he felt the heartbeat of the house, slow and ponderous, vibrating through the floor and into his bones. The sensation was both mesmerizing and horrifying, a constant reminder that he was trapped inside something that was not merely built, but born. The wallpaper peeled away in strips, revealing raw, quivering tissue beneath, and the paint bubbled and oozed as if the house itself was sweating in anticipation. He reached out once, unable to resist, and recoiled as the wall seemed to shudder beneath his touch, warm and slick like living flesh. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic and cloying. It filled his lungs with every breath, coating his tongue with the taste of rust and old blood. Dust motes floated in the stagnant air, swirling in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, as if the house was exhaling its secrets in slow, deliberate breaths. Mold crept along the walls and ceilings, blooming in grotesque patterns that resembled bruises or wounds. Every inhalation felt like a violation, as if he was breathing in the very essence of the house, becoming a part of its endless cycle of rot and renewal. The house seemed to inhale and exhale around him, its breath a warm, fetid wind that carried whispers of his deepest fears. The walls expanded and contracted with each breath, the floor rising and falling in time with the unseen lungs of the structure. Sometimes, a thick mist would roll through the corridors, swirling around his ankles, and carrying with it the faint sound of voices, some pleading, some mocking, all impossible to ignore. The very air vibrated with anticipation, as if the house was waiting for something, or someone, to finally give in to its embrace. Mac wandered from room to room, each one a grotesque reflection of its former self. Once familiar spaces were now twisted and deformed, their original purpose lost beneath layers of decay and corruption. Furniture sagged and warped, sprouting strange growths that pulsed in time with the house's heartbeat. Wallpaper sloughed off in wet, curling strips, revealing the raw, living tissue beneath. Even the light seemed wrong, filtering through the grime in sickly, unnatural hues that made everything appear diseased. Every doorway promised escape, but led only to more confusion, more horror, as the house rearranged itself around him, trapping him in an endless maze of nightmares. Fireplaces gaped like toothless mouths, floorboards shifted underfoot like undulating flesh. The hearths, once symbols of warmth and comfort, now yawned wide in silent hunger, their blackened interiors lined with jagged, bone-like stones. The floors rippled and buckled as he walked, threatening to swallow him whole with every uncertain step. Sometimes he thought he saw something moving just beneath the surface, a writhing serpentine shape that vanished as soon as he looked directly at it. The house was hungry, and he was its only prey. There was nowhere to escape the watchful gaze of the house, its heartbeat echoing the frantic rhythm of his own. Eyes seemed to form in the patterns of the wallpaper, in the knots of the wood, in the shifting shadows that danced along the ceiling. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if every secret, every fear was being laid bare before the house's unblinking stare. The relentless thump of its heart filled his ears, drowning out his own thoughts until he could no longer tell where his terror ended and the house's hunger began. In that suffocating embrace, he realized the truth. The house was alive, and it would never let him go. His mind, unable to reconcile the impossible reality around him, started to fracture. The boundaries between what was real and what was imagined blurred with each passing day. The house, once a place of shelter, now felt like a living, breathing entity, its walls pulsing with a heartbeat that seemed to echo his own. Shadows twisted in the corners, and the air was thick with a sense of suffocating dread. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards felt amplified, as if the house itself was listening, waiting for him to break. He found himself talking to the house, pleading with it to release him from its fleshy embrace. At first, it was just a whisper, a desperate plea in the darkness. But soon, his conversations grew more frantic, more urgent. He begged the walls to let him go, to stop pressing in on him, to give him back his freedom. Sometimes he would press his ear against the cold, damp plaster, hoping for a sign that the house was listening. Other times he would claw at the wallpaper, desperate to peel back the layers and find some escape, some evidence that he was not truly trapped inside a living nightmare. Sometimes he imagined it answered, its whispers coalescing into words that echoed his own darkest thoughts. The house seemed to know his fears, his regrets, his secrets. Its voice was soft, almost soothing, but beneath the surface was a menace that chilled him to the bone. It told him things he didn't want to hear, reminders of past mistakes, of guilt he could never escape. The more he listened, the more the house's voice became indistinguishable from his own inner monologue, until he could no longer tell where his thoughts ended and the house's began. One day he woke to find a deep gash on his forearm. The pain was sharp and immediate, but what terrified him most was the complete absence of memory. He stared at the wound, trying to recall how it happened, but his mind was blank. Had he done this to himself in a moment of madness, or had the house somehow marked him, claiming him as its own? The uncertainty gnawed at him, feeding the growing sense of dread that had taken root in his soul. He had no memory of inflicting it, yet there, staring back at him from the flesh of the wall, was a matching wound, weeping a thick, viscous fluid that smelled eerily like his own blood. The sight was grotesque, almost surreal. The wall seemed to pulse and throb, as if it shared his pain, as if it was alive and suffering alongside him. He reached out, almost in a trance, and touched the oozing wound. The sensation was both familiar and alien, warm, sticky, and undeniably real. It was as if the house was feeding on his agony, drawing strength from his suffering, binding them together in a cycle of mirrored pain. His reflection in the warped mirror in the hallway was no longer his own. The glass, once clear, was now clouded and cracked, distorting his features into something unrecognizable. He stared at the twisted image, searching for some trace of the person he used to be, but all he saw was a stranger, a hollow, broken man whose pain was etched into every line of his face. The mirror seemed to mock him, reflecting not just his appearance, but the darkness that had taken hold inside him. His face was gaunt, hollowed, his eyes reflecting the same sickly pallor as the walls around him. The color had drained from his skin, leaving him pale and almost translucent, as if he was fading away. His cheeks were sunken, his lips cracked and dry. Even his eyes, once bright with hope, now seemed dull and lifeless, mirroring the decay that surrounded him. It was as if the house was consuming him from the inside out, erasing his identity and replacing it with its own. He was becoming one with the house, his pain, his very essence, seeping into its walls. Every wound, every tear, every moment of despair was absorbed by the house, leaving a mark that would never fade. He could feel himself dissolving, his boundaries blurring, until he was no longer sure where he ended and the house began. The walls pulsed with his heartbeat, the floors creaked with his footsteps, and the air was thick with the scent of his fear. In that moment he realized the terrible truth. He was not just trapped inside the house was trapped inside him. And as long as he remained, their suffering would be forever intertwined, a cycle of mirrored pain with no escape. The house seemed to delight in his unraveling. It pressed closer, the hallways narrowing, the ceilings lowering. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, the scent of decay overpowering. He was trapped in a suffocating embrace, the walls closing in, drawing him inexorably towards his doom. He stumbled through the endless corridors, a prisoner in his own home. The house was a labyrinth, its every turn leading him further into its depths. The air grew thick and heavy, the silence broken only by the rhythmic thump of the house's heartbeat and the frantic pounding of his own.